What would you do if your own homeowners association started fining you for parking in your own driveway? Would you pay the money quietly, or would you fight back? And what if, while digging for answers, you discovered forged signatures, missing money, and neighbors too scared to speak up? That's exactly what happened to me. One letter on my doorstep turned into a war with the very people who were supposed to protect our community. I uncovered corruption that went deeper than anyone imagined. And when the truth finally came out, the results were unbelievable. This is the story of how I exposed my HOA, and why nothing in our neighborhood has been the same since. Willow Creek looked like perfection on the outside. Wide sidewalks lined with maple trees, lawns trimmed like golf courses, kids on bikes circling cul-de-sacs under streetlights that clicked on exactly at dusk. Every house had a neat mailbox painted in the same dark green. Every driveway seemed to gleam after a Saturday wash. Realtors loved showing homes here. They called it a model community. People believed it, until they lived here long enough to see what perfection really cost. I had only been a homeowner for a year when the first letter arrived. A plain white envelope with the HOA logo slipped under my door like it was delivering bad news on purpose. Inside was a violation notice. Fine, $250. Reason: unauthorized vehicle storage in driveway, section 4.5C. I remember reading it 3 times, convinced I was misunderstanding. My car wasn't abandoned. It wasn't broken. It wasn't even old enough to complain about. It was a 10-year-old Honda Civic, registered, insured, driven daily to work. It had sat in my driveway every night since I moved in. Everyone parked in their driveways. Why was mine suddenly a crime? At first I laughed. I thought it had to be a mistake, some clerical slip, a box checked wrong by whoever processed these letters. But then I noticed something odd. The letter was signed Harold L., board president. The signature was too perfect, the kind of smooth loop you get from a computer font, not a pen. I dug through the welcome packet I'd received when I moved in. There was a postcard from Harold back then, welcoming me to the neighborhood. That signature looked different, messier, real. The one on my violation notice looked fake. That detail stuck in my mind like a splinter. The next morning I tried to call the number listed at the bottom of the notice. It wasn't Harold's number, but a management company called Stratford Residential. The voicemail was cheerful, automated, and useless. Thank you for helping us maintain community excellence. Please leave your account number and a detailed message. I left one message, then another. No one called back. That week, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. Orange violation tags flapping on neighbors' mailboxes. Rita across the street muttering under her breath as she ripped one off and shoved it into her purse. The Lindsays, who had lived here for more than a decade, whispering about liens while their 2 teenage boys shot hoops in the driveway. On Saturday, I caught Rita as she was hauling groceries from her minivan. "Did you get one of these too?" I asked, holding up my violation notice like a piece of evidence. She gave a humorless laugh. "For my grass," said it wasn't cut to the recommended length. They measured the curvature. She shook her head. "Can you believe that? I just paid the fine. Easier that way." "Did you fight it?" I asked. "Fight the HOA?" Her voice dropped. "You don't fight them. They say they'll lien your house." That word lien hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't even realized the HOA had that kind of power. That night, I pulled the blue binder from the shelf, the one I had been using to keep warranties and manuals. I slid the violation notice into a clear sleeve. Then I found the bylaws packet, the one with cheery teal cover pages that looked like they belonged to a travel brochure. Section 4.5C. That was what the letter had cited. I read it 3 times under the yellow light of my desk lamp. It didn't say you couldn't park in your driveway. It said unregistered or inoperable vehicles may not be stored for longer than 72 hours. Mine was registered, operable, driven every single day. The bylaw didn't apply. So why fine me? By the time I closed the binder, my stomach had that heavy buzzing feeling, half anger, half adrenaline. I wasn't imagining this. Something wasn't right. On Thursday, I went to the neighborhood pool after work. A new laminated sign was zip-tied to the fence. No glass, no pets, no outside food, no unauthorized gatherings. That last line was new. It had the same cold bureaucratic tone as my violation letter. Lionel, one of the board members, was patrolling in his navy windbreaker with a radio clipped to his belt. He wasn't actual security, but he liked to act like it. He stopped by my chair. "Afternoon," he said, nodding toward the sign. "Just a reminder, enforcement is tightening up. People have been getting sloppy." I forced a smile. "What counts as an unauthorized gathering? 2 people by the pool." He didn't laugh. "If you've got questions, you can bring them up at the meeting Monday." When he walked away, I realized my violation letter was tucked into my pool bag. I didn't know why I brought it with me, but I felt safer having it nearby, like proof I wasn't crazy. Sunday morning, there was a second envelope on my doormat. "Fine, $500. Reason: non-compliant trash receptacle visibility. Section 3.2. I stared at it in disbelief. My trash cans were behind a locked gate, out of sight. I marched outside, took photos from every angle, printed them, slid them into the binder. The letter ended with a new line. Repeat violations may result in acceleration of enforcement measures. Acceleration, as if punishment were a machine, and someone had just pressed the gas. By Monday, I was ready. I left work early, dressed neatly, and carried my binder like a shield. The community center smelled like coffee and furniture polish. At the front sat the board, Harold in his polo shirt, and sunglasses perched on his head, Janice with her glasses chain, Lionel with his windbreaker and radio. The agenda was printed on lavender paper. Pool chair replacement, holiday light guidelines, violation enforcement update. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. My voice shook, but I spoke anyway. Section 4.5c defines storage as unregistered or inoperable vehicles. My car is neither. Why was I fined $250? Murmurs spread through the room. Harold gave a corporate smile. We can't discuss individual violations here. Please take that up with Stratford. I did. They never called me back. Stratford is very busy, Janice said flatly. And Section 3.2, I continued, holding up photos of my trash cans hidden behind the gate. I was fined $500 for non-compliance. These pictures are time-stamped. My cans are not visible. Lionel leaned forward. We act on community reports. Neighbors send photos. We verify. Verify how? I asked. Because these letters don't match reality. And the signatures. I pulled out the violation notice, holding it high. This one doesn't even look like Harold's real signature. The room buzzed louder. Harold slammed his knuckles against the table like a gavel. Out of order. Next question. But I'd already seen it. The flicker of panic in Janice's eyes. The way Lionel's jaw clenched. Something was wrong, and they knew I was close. And for the first time I realized, maybe I wasn't the only one ready to fight back. The meeting ended with Harold slamming his knuckles against the table, declaring, out of order. Next question. But the looks on people's faces stayed with me. Miss Diaz clutched her purse like it contained her entire garden. The Lindsays whispered to each other with tight jaws. Rita avoided my eyes but gave me the smallest nod when I left, as if to say, keep going. Someone has to. That night, I spread the bylaws across my kitchen table, like a map of enemy territory. The pages were thin, the kind of paper you'd expect in a church hymnal, not a legal document controlling hundreds of families' lives. I highlighted sections that didn't add up, stuck post-it notes on margins, wrote questions in thick black marker. Who enforces this? Who verifies? Where do fines go? Buried in the back, I found section 9.2, allocation of fine revenue. It read, all fine revenue shall be deposited into the association's general operating fund, to be used at the discretion of the board for community improvement. At first glance, it sounded reasonable, but the more I read it, the more wrong it felt. At the discretion of the board. No limits, no accountability, just a blank check. I checked the treasurer's summary from the meeting, the one where Janice had smiled without giving a single number. There was a line that said, miscellaneous income, $48,000. No breakdown, no explanation. How much of that was fines? Where was it going? I looked around my house. $48,000 could repave the cracked basketball court. It could replace the ancient pool chairs. It could fix the broken lights in the west parking lot. But none of those had been touched. The money had vanished, like rain into sand. The next day, I knocked on doors. Miss Diaz invited me in, her living room smelling like tomato vines and cinnamon. She showed me her violation letter. It said, unauthorized landscaping changes, fine $200. But I plant the same every year, she said, her hands trembling. Tomatoes, peppers, they call it unauthorized. I call it survival. I sell some at the market to pay dues. I slid her letter into a clear sleeve for the binder. She looked at me like I was building an ark. At the Lindsay's house, Mr. Lindsay slapped a stack of notices onto the counter. Basketball hoop, garbage bins, fence paint color. They even fined us for a bird feeder, for God's sake. His face was red with anger. We've paid over $1,000 this year alone. Do you know where the money goes? I asked. He barked a laugh. Into Harold's new golf cart, probably. By the end of the week, my binder was thick with plastic sleeves. Each violation seemed more ridiculous than the last. A chalk drawing, a welcome mat, a flag in the wrong color scheme, and every letter ended with the same threat. Failure to comply may result in lien. The fines weren't random, they were targeted. Families with kids, retirees on fixed incomes, people who couldn't afford to fight back. Meanwhile, board members' lawns looked like magazine covers, and no one ever saw orange tags on their mailboxes. On Friday afternoon, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. The return address read, Stratford Residential Management,
My chest tightened as I tore it open. Inside were 30 pages of financial summaries printed on dull gray paper. They weren't detailed ledgers, just vague categories: maintenance, security, legal fees, miscellaneous income, miscellaneous expenses. One line stood out like a bruise: legal fees, $92,000. For what lawsuits? For what cases? No one had mentioned litigation in any meeting I'd attended, and if fines were supposed to improve the community, why was nearly double the fine revenue disappearing into legal costs? The pages smelled like toner and secrecy. I added them to the binder, but the binder was starting to feel less like protection and more like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I was building. On Friday afternoon, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. The return address read, Stratford Residential Management. My chest tightened as I tore it open. Inside were 30 pages of financial summaries, printed on dull gray paper. They weren't detailed ledgers, just vague categories: maintenance, security, legal fees, miscellaneous income, miscellaneous expenses. One line stood out like a bruise: legal fees, $92,000. For what lawsuits? For what cases? No one had mentioned litigation in any meeting I'd attended, and if fines were supposed to improve the community, why was nearly double the fine revenue disappearing into legal costs? The pages smelled like toner and secrecy. I added them to the binder, but the binder was starting to feel less like protection and more like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I was building. That weekend, I went to the grocery store. As I loaded bags into my trunk, I noticed Harold's car, sleek black, brand new, parked across from mine. He leaned against it in his polo shirt, sunglasses glinting even though the sky was cloudy. Word is, you've been asking a lot of questions. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's good. Shows you care about the community. I do care, I said evenly. That's why I want to know where our money's going. He chuckled, slow and rehearsed. Finances are complicated. People don't always understand. Best to let the board handle that. I'm not sure the bylaws agree, I said, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. For a moment, his jaw tightened. Then he patted the roof of his car. Be careful not to get too worked up, he said softly. Stress isn't good for you. He slid into the driver's seat and drove away, leaving the faint smell of cologne and threat behind. Sunday night, I got a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice, hurried and shaky. I heard you're keeping records, she said. Who is this? Check the invoices. Half of them are fake. Landscaping, security, repairs. It's all inflated. Sometimes the work isn't even done. They pay shell companies, friends, family. The line clicked dead before I could ask another question. I sat in the dark with the phone pressed to my ear, the binder on the table like it was staring at me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just collecting violations. I was collecting proof of something bigger, something criminal. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside my window. My heart hammered. I peeked through the blinds and saw a figure standing at the edge of my driveway. They wore a hoodie pulled low, a phone in their hand. The screen glowed as they snapped photos of my house. Hey, I shouted, yanking the blinds open. The figure bolted, sprinting down the street into the shadows. When I stepped outside, a small object lay on the mulch near my window. A stone, the size of a marble, just like the one that had hit my glass weeks ago. It wasn't random. It was a message. By the end of the month, I had transformed my dining room into a war room. The binder had grown into 2 binders. My walls were pinned with timelines, violation patterns, financial summaries highlighted in neon yellow. I traced arrows from miscellaneous income to legal fees, from unauthorized landscaping to Miss Diaz, from unauthorized vehicle to me. The board wasn't just strict. They weren't just overreaching. They were profiting. The fines weren't about maintaining property values. They were about feeding a machine, one that only the board controlled. And I was going to prove it. The next HOA meeting was already posted on the website. Same time, same lavender agenda sheet. But this time, I wasn't coming to ask questions. This time, I was coming with evidence, and I had no idea how dangerous that would make me. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. My binders sat on the dining table like loaded weapons, post-it notes fluttering in the draft from the ceiling fan. Every page screamed of something rotten. Fake signatures, inflated expenses, intimidation tactics. But evidence meant nothing if I didn't have allies. The lavender agenda sheet was clipped to the bulletin board in the lobby. Just like always, I walked in with my binder pressed against my chest, scanning faces. Rita was there, her lips thin with quiet rage. The Lindsays stood in the back, arms crossed. Miss Diaz clutched her purse again. The board sat at the front, smug and polished. Harold in his polo, Janice with her chain glasses, Lionel in his windbreaker. They didn't know it yet, but I wasn't here to ask questions this time. When the agenda reached violation enforcement update, I stood up. My voice carried more force than I expected. I've collected over 40 violation notices from residents. I have photographs, bylaws, and evidence that these fines don't match reality. I've also obtained Stratford's financial summaries. I held the gray sheets high, and they don't add up. $92,000 in legal fees, with no lawsuits on record. $48,000 in miscellaneous income with no improvements to show. Where did that money go? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For the first time, the board didn't look smug. Out of order, Harold snapped. Not out of order, I shot back. Section 7.4 of the bylaws states any member may demand a financial audit if mismanagement is suspected. I'm making that demand tonight. A beat of silence. Then, something unexpected happened. Rita stood up, seconded. Her voice was shaking, but it was enough. One by one, others raised their hands. Miss Diaz, the Lindsays, even a man I barely knew from 3 streets over. Hands filled the air like a silent vote of no confidence. Harold slammed the table. This meeting is adjourned. He stormed out, Lionel following close behind. But Janice lingered. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and something else, guilt. Then she turned and hurried after them. The room buzzed. People clustered around me, voices low and urgent. Don't stop now, Rita whispered. They've been bleeding us for years. After that night, everything shifted. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now slipped me envelopes, whispered warnings, and handed over copies of their letters. I started calling it the Whisper Network. One man showed me an invoice for security patrols, billed at $12,000 for a single month, yet no one had ever seen a patrol car. Another neighbor revealed a $7,000 landscaping charge, yet the grass behind the tennis courts was knee-high with weeds. It was theft. The retaliation started almost immediately. A bright orange sticker appeared on my mailbox. Final warning. My offense. A welcome mat that wasn't neutral in tone. 2 days later, a towing company showed up in front of my driveway, claiming my car had been reported as abandoned. I showed them my registration and daily mileage log, binder in hand. They left, muttering apologies. That night, someone slipped a dead bird onto my porch. Its wings were stiff, its neck twisted. A message. I wasn't just fighting fines anymore. I was fighting people willing to intimidate me into silence. The breakthrough came from Janice. She showed up at my door one rainy afternoon, glasses fogged, clutching a folder. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. Inside were copies of checks, not HOA checks, personal ones. Payments written from the association's account to a company called L&H Maintenance. Harold's brother, Janice said. It's not a real company. They funnel money through it. I signed the summaries because Harold told me it was standard. But it isn't. It's fraud. I stared at the folder. It was the smoking gun I hadn't dared hope for. Why now? I asked. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. Because you're right. And because they're going to come after you harder. I can't let them bury you. Now, they weren't just records. They were evidence in a case. One that could topple the board. But with proof came danger. If Harold had been bold enough to threaten me with stress isn't good for you, what would he do when he realized I had his brother's fake company in black and white? That night, I wrote a single sentence on a blank page and taped it to my wall. And for the first time, I knew this fight wasn't just about me or about a few neighbors' fines. It was about saving Willow Creek itself. For a few weeks after Harold's arrest, Willow Creek felt like it had finally exhaled. Kids played basketball in driveways again without orange stickers slapped on their hoops. Miss Diaz planted her tomatoes without fear of a violation letter. Rita walked her dog and laughed for the first time in months. But I should have known the silence was temporary. People like Harold don't just give up power. They fight to claw it back. It started with the letters. Thick white envelopes. Delivered not by the HOA this time, but by certified mail. My name in bold print across the top. Inside, defamation, harassment, damages sought, $500,000. Harold had filed a civil suit against me, personally. And I wasn't the only one. Rita got one. The Lindsays too. Even Janice, who had turned whistleblower. The man who had drained our community dry was now claiming we had ruined his reputation. I met with a lawyer downtown, a man whose office smelled of leather and old books. He skimmed the lawsuit, eyebrows raised. This is a slap suit, he said finally. A what? Strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's a tactic. He knows he won't win. The goal is to scare you, drain you financially, silence you. I swallowed hard. Can he succeed? The lawyer leaned back. That depends. Do you have the stomach for a fight? The lawsuits worked. At least partly. Some neighbors who had marched with me now pulled away. One man handed me back his copy of the petition. I can't afford a lawyer, he whispered. I've got 2 kids in college. Rita stayed strong, but I could see the fear in her eyes when she held the letter. "I don't have $500,000, she said. "You don't need it," I told her. "He's bluffing." But even as I said it, my stomach twisted. What if he wasn't? The community that had once stood united was cracking, and Harold knew it. One night, I opened my mailbox to find an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Look deeper. Harold wasn't working alone. No signature. No return address. Just a warning. That same week, Claire, the reporter, called me. "I've been digging," she said. "Some of the shell companies tied to the HOA funds aren't just linked to Harold's brother. They connect to Stratford Residential too. The management company, the ones who had ignored my calls, funneled the fines, printed the financial summaries. If Harold went down, so did they. Which meant they had every reason to fight dirty. It didn't take long. Flyers appeared on windshields around the neighborhood. Don't let liars destroy Willow Creek. Don't let outsiders take control. Social media posts popped up in local groups. The so-called whistleblowers are exaggerating. They want chaos, not community. Even my employer got an anonymous email. Screenshots of me at the HOA meeting. Twisted captions accusing me of being a troublemaker with a personal vendetta. The board was gone, but Harold's allies were everywhere, hiding in plain sight. One night, I woke to flashing lights outside my window. Police cars. An officer knocked on my door. "Are you John Miller?" he asked. "You've been accused of harassment. We need to ask you some questions." Someone had filed a false police report against me, claiming I'd threatened Harold's wife. I showed them the binder, the lawsuit papers, the notes I'd kept on every interaction. After 2 tense hours, they left. But the message was clear. They wanted me scared, cornered, paranoid. Not everyone was cowed. One evening, Janice called. "There's more," she whispered. "Meet me at the diner off Highway 12, back booth." When I arrived, she slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements. Not just HOA accounts, personal accounts. Transfers from Stratford Residential directly into Harold's name. Tens of thousands at a time. "This is bigger than fines," she said. "It's fraud, yes, but it's also money laundering. Stratford was in on it. Harold was just the face." I stared at the numbers. "How did you get these?" Janice's lips tightened. "Let's just say not everyone at Stratford is loyal to Harold." With the new evidence, Claire ran a follow-up story. HOA scandal tied to management company. Millions missing across multiple communities. This time, it wasn't just Willow Creek. Emails poured in from other neighborhoods. People who had the same complaints, the same fines, the same fear. Stratford's corruption wasn't local. It was statewide. The Attorney General opened a full investigation. Stratford's offices were raided. Executives ducked cameras as they were led away in handcuffs. But Harold wasn't done. From jail, he filed appeals, motions, desperate attempts to claw his way back. His lawyers painted him as a victim of a smear campaign, a patriot homeowner targeted by radicals. The court battles dragged on for months. Hearings, depositions, subpoenas. Every time I walked into the courthouse, I felt the weight of eyes on me, some sympathetic, some hostile. The day Harold's trial began, the courtroom was packed. Reporters scribbled notes. Neighbors filled the benches. The prosecution laid it out clearly. Forged signatures, fake invoices, laundered money, shell companies. Janice testified, voice trembling but steady. I testified too, binders stacked on the witness stand. When Harold took the stand, he looked smaller than I remembered. No polo shirt, no sunglasses, just a man in a wrinkled suit, clinging to lies. "They hated me," he said. "They wanted to destroy me. I was protecting the community." But the jury didn't buy it. After 2 weeks, the verdict came. Guilty. Embezzlement. Forgery. Fraud. Harold was sentenced to 12 years. Lionel got 6. Stratford executives faced federal charges. Willow Creek survived, but it would never be the same. The community rebuilt with a new board. Transparent, fair, neighbor-run. Fines were rare, reasonable, voted on in open meetings. People called me a hero, but I never felt like one. I still remembered the dead bird on my porch, the slashed tires, the fear in Rita's eyes when she held that lawsuit. One evening, as the sun set over the cul-de-sac, Rita said, "You know, if you hadn't fought back, none of this would have changed."
I shook my head. If we hadn't fought back, it took all of us. But deep down, I knew the truth. One letter on my doorstep had started a war. And even though we'd won, the scars would never fully fade. For months after Harold's sentencing, life in Willow Creek settled into something like peace. Driveways were filled with cars without fear of fines. Kids chalked hopscotch on sidewalks without violation notices. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only clipped one branch of a much larger tree. Stratford Residential wasn't just mismanaging Willow Creek. They had their claws in dozens of communities. And Harold, as loud and arrogant as he'd been, wasn't the true mastermind. He was a pawn. One night, Claire, the reporter, called me. Her voice was low, urgent. "You ever wonder how Harold thought he could get away with it for so long?" "Because Stratford backed him," I said. Not just Stratford, she whispered. Developers, politicians, judges. Claire showed me documents leaked after Stratford's offices were raided. There were payment ledgers. Millions of dollars moved around in neat columns. Some went to board presidents like Harold. Others went to consultants and advisors. But some went to PACs, political funds, even campaign accounts. HOAs are cash machines, Claire explained over coffee. Thousands of residents paying dues, boards funneling fines, management companies taking cuts. It's unregulated, opaque, hidden behind the phrase community improvement. She tapped one page with her pen, and here's the kicker. Some of that money doesn't stay in the community. It funds real estate projects, political campaigns, entire networks built on squeezing homeowners. I stared at the papers, bile rising in my throat. Harold hadn't just been greedy. He'd been part of a system designed to bleed people dry while politicians looked the other way. Once the first article went national, my inbox exploded. Emails from Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Texas, people telling the same story. Fines for trash cans, liens for lawn colors, lawsuits that bankrupted families. A woman from Nevada wrote, "They took my house over $600 in fines, sold it at auction. The board president's cousin bought it." A man from Arizona said, "Our HOA board is run by one family. They fine everyone else, but their own houses never get touched. We've tried to fight it, but every lawyer says we'll lose." It was like hearing echoes of Willow Creek in every corner of the country. Then came the email that changed everything. No name, no return address, just a burner email account. You think Harold was the end? He was nothing. Look at Horizon Development Group. Look at Judge Callahan. Look at the money trail. Attached was a single PDF, a scanned contract between Stratford Residential and a developer, Horizon. The contract outlined expedited approvals for new housing projects in exchange for partnership fees, drawn directly from HOA revenues. In plain English, Stratford and Horizon were using HOAs as piggy banks to bankroll real estate empires, and Judge Callahan, a state court judge who had dismissed multiple HOA fraud cases, while quietly receiving consulting fees from Horizon. I showed the documents to Claire. She exhaled sharply. This isn't just a story anymore. This is systemic corruption. If we go public with this, it'll hit the State House, maybe even DC. My stomach twisted. I remembered the dead bird, the slashed tires, the false police report. That was Harold's level of retaliation. What would developers and judges do to silence me? Claire saw the hesitation in my face. They'll come after us, yes, but if we don't do this, they'll keep stealing homes. Families will keep losing everything. You wanted to expose the truth. This is it. Before we could publish, the threats started again. Unmarked cars idled near my house at night, headlights off. My email was hacked. Neighbors got anonymous messages accusing me of being a con artist. Someone spray-painted Tritor across my garage door. One evening, Rita knocked on my door trembling. "They sent me a letter," she whispered, holding out an envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper with her name typed across it, and nothing else. A message. "We see you. We know where you live." I knew then. This wasn't just a neighborhood fight anymore. This was war against a machine. The story broke wide open when Claire's article ran on a national outlet. HOA corruption tied to developers and judges, a hidden network of power. It went viral. News anchors debated it. Homeowners across the country flooded hotlines with complaints. Within weeks, a Senate subcommittee announced hearings. Claire was called to testify. So was I. I sat under the harsh lights in Washington, microphones pointed at my face. Senators asked me to describe the fines, the forged signatures, the threats. My voice shook, but I told them everything. Behind me, dozens of homeowners from across the country nodded. We weren't isolated anymore. We were a movement. The fallout was massive. Horizon Development's CEO resigned in disgrace. Judge Callahan was investigated by the Ethics Board. Stratford Residential was dissolved, its executives facing federal fraud charges. But more importantly, the hearings forced lawmakers to act. New bills were introduced to regulate HOAs, cap fines and require financial transparency. For the first time, the machine was being dismantled. Victory came with a price. I had to move out of Willow Creek for a while. The threats didn't stop, even after the hearings. My address leaked online. My face ended up on hate blogs, calling me the man who wants to destroy communities. Some nights, I lay awake wondering if it had been worth it. My life was quieter before that first violation letter. Safer, easier. But then I remembered Miss Diaz's trembling hands, Rita's whispered nod, the Lindsay's basketball hoop, and I knew the answer. Years later, people still talk about Willow Creek. College professors teach it as a case study in civic activism. Journalists cite it as the spark that started a national reform movement. Sometimes, new homeowners email me. "I read your story before buying my house. I checked the HOA first. Thank you." And sometimes, when I drive past those dark green mailboxes, I remember the moment I circled 2 words on a page: fight back. That choice didn't just change Willow Creek, it changed everything. On the surface, Harold's sentencing felt like closure. Willow Creek was free, Stratford was in pieces, and neighbors were planting gardens instead of hiding from fines. But deep down, I knew the war wasn't over.
Why? Because too much money was missing. Stratford's ledgers showed millions flowing through accounts far bigger than Willow Creek's budget. And Harold, for all his bluster, wasn't smart enough to build something that large. We hadn't killed the beast. We'd only cut off one of its heads. Claire called me late one night, her voice tight. "You need to see this," she said. At the diner the next morning she slid me a folder. Inside were contracts Stratford had with other neighborhoods. The language was identical, clauses about management discretion, legal expenditures, and community improvement funds, but one line stood out: Preferred Development Partnership, Horizon Group. Claire tapped the page. This developer has ties in 3 states. Every HOA Stratford managed funneled money into their projects. It wasn't just corruption, it was a pipeline. Our fines had been financing real estate empires. When homeowners sued Stratford in other states, nearly all the cases had landed in the courtroom of one man, Judge Callahan, and almost every case had been dismissed on technicalities. Claire pulled up his campaign donations. "Guess who funded him?" she asked. I scanned the list. Horizon Development, Stratford executives, shell companies with the same P.O. boxes as Harold's fake vendors. It wasn't coincidence, it was protection. Just when I thought life was settling, the threats started again. A black SUV idled outside my house at midnight. My emails were hacked. Anonymous comments online called me a fraud, a liar, a traitor to his neighbors. Rita came to my door in tears. "They slipped this under my mat." She handed me a single sheet of paper with nothing but her name on it, typed in bold, centered, like a death certificate. I knew then, we weren't fighting Harold anymore. We were fighting the machine that created him. Weeks later, I got another unmarked envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "If you want to understand, plug it in. Don't tell anyone." I plugged it into an old laptop disconnected from the internet. Inside were scanned emails, contracts and invoices, direct correspondence between Stratford executives and Horizon Group. One email read, "Ensure fines remain high to maintain cash flow. Partner boards must remain cooperative. Legal cover guaranteed via Callahan's office." The whisperer, whoever they were, had just confirmed my worst fear. Stratford wasn't unique. This was an organized racket, shielded by judges, bankrolled by developers, and fueled by homeowners' misery. Claire and I debated for days. Publishing this meant putting a target on both our backs, but keeping quiet meant letting the machine roll over more families like Ms. Dyer's, more neighborhoods like Willow Creek. Finally, Claire said, "We don't sit on this, we blow it wide open." Her article went live a week later. The HOA Cartel, How Developers, Judges and Management Companies Exploit Homeowners Nationwide. The story went viral. Talk shows debated it. News anchors grilled politicians about why HOAs had so much unchecked power. Homeowners across the country flooded hotlines with stories. A veteran fined $800 for a flag in his yard. A widow who lost her house over improper mulch. Families bankrupted by legal fees fighting boards they never voted for. For the first time, people realized it wasn't about messy lawns or trash cans. It was about power, money and control. Weeks later, I got a letter from Washington. A Senate subcommittee wanted me to testify. The hearing room was packed. Reporters scribbling notes, cameras flashing, rows of angry homeowners who had flown in from across the country. I sat at the table, binders stacked in front of me. My voice shook, but I told them everything, from the fake signatures on my first violation letter, to the forged invoices, the intimidation, the whisperer's files. One senator leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, are you saying HOAs across this country are being used as financial vehicles for political and corporate gain?" "Yes," I said, "and I have the documents to prove it." The machine didn't stay silent. Within days, smear campaigns hit harder. Flyers circulated calling me anti-community. Online trolls claimed I had faked evidence. A lawsuit appeared in federal court accusing me of wire fraud. It was all smoke, designed to muddy the waters. But this time, the eyes of the nation were watching. The hearings led to subpoenas. Subpoenas led to raids. Horizon Group executives were caught funneling millions through HOAs into political PACs. Judge Callahan was forced to resign. Stratford's top brass were indicted on federal fraud and racketeering charges. It wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of something bigger: accountability. Across the country, homeowners organized. Facebook groups turned into advocacy organizations. Petitions became protests. People who had once been silenced by fear were now armed with knowledge and unity. Laws were introduced in state legislatures. Caps on HOA fines, transparency in budgets, limits on liens. For the first time the machine was bleeding, but it wasn't free. I had to move out of Willow Creek for months. My address leaked online. My face was plastered on blogs calling me a criminal. Some nights I wondered if it had been worth it. Then I'd get an email like this: "Because of your story, I fought back. Because of you I kept my home." And I knew the answer. Years later, people still talk about Willow Creek as the spark that lit a movement. Universities teach it in classes on civic activism. Journalists reference it as the scandal that changed HOA laws. Sometimes, when I drive past those dark green mailboxes, I remember the first letter slipped under my door. The fake signature, the $250 fine. That letter was supposed to scare me into silence. Instead, it exposed an empire. I thought the war had ended when Harold was sentenced, Stratford collapsed, and Horizon executives were dragged into federal courts. But the Whisperer, the mysterious figure who had fed me files from the shadows, proved me wrong. It happened on a rainy Thursday. A padded envelope sat on my porch, damp but intact. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a single typed note. It isn't over. Follow the money offshore. The files on the drive were staggering. Bank transfers routed through the Cayman Islands. Payments marked as consulting fees from Horizon Group to anonymous shell corporations. And in the margins of one PDF, a scribbled annotation. These accounts fund political campaigns and overseas projects. The HOA money is only the surface. I stared at the screen, sick to my stomach. Harold and Stratford had been small-time players compared to this. We weren't just talking about HOA fines anymore. We were talking about international money laundering. I called Claire immediately. She met me at her office, stacks of case files already piled high. She skimmed the documents, her jaw tightening. This isn't just fraud. This is organized crime. Global. I asked. She nodded grimly. Global. Offshore laundering. Dark money in politics. Real estate projects bankrolled with dirty cash. HOAs were just the collection buckets. Her voice lowered. If we go public with this, it'll shake Washington. But it'll also paint targets on our backs bigger than ever. I didn't need reminding. The dead bird. The slashed tires. The false police report. I'd already felt what a local board could do. What would a billion-dollar developer network do? Still, I looked her in the eye. We go public. It didn't take long before I knew they were watching again. A black sedan appeared outside my house 2 nights in a row. Same spot. Same time. No license plates. When I drove to the grocery store, a silver SUV followed me for 6 turns before vanishing. Rita called in tears. There was a man outside my window last night, just standing there. He walked away when I turned on the light. Fear was spreading again, like it had in the early days. But this time, it wasn't Harold sending his cronies. It was something larger. The Senate had already used my testimony once. Now, with these files, Claire and I had enough to trigger something bigger. We need federal protection, Claire said. If we walk in alone, they'll eat us alive. If we walk in with the FBI, they'll have no choice but to act. So we scheduled a meeting. Claire, myself, and 2 agents in dark suits, who introduced themselves only as special investigators. They combed through the USB drive in silence, eyes flicking across screens. Finally, one of them leaned back. You realize what you're holding here. This isn't just fraud. This is RICO. Racketeering. It's mafia level. I swallowed. So what do? The agent's eyes hardened. We burn it down. All of it. But once we start, there's no turning back. The next wave hit like a hurricane. News outlets suddenly carried op-eds calling me a disgruntled homeowner with a vendetta. Fake social media accounts flooded local groups, accusing me of forging evidence. One even claimed I'd stolen HOA funds myself. A website popped up overnight, exposedtheliar.com, plastered with my photo, twisted stories about my past, fabricated arrest records. It was coordinated, precise, relentless. I wanted to scream. But Claire reminded me, smear campaigns mean they're scared. It means we're close. One evening, as I left a coffee shop, 2 men in suits blocked my path. You need to stop, one said. His tone was casual, but his eyes were cold. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, pulse racing. You do, the other muttered. The files, the hearings, drop it, or next time we won't talk. They walked away without another word. That night, I found another stone on my porch, just like the one that had hit my window months earlier. Only this time, words were scratched into its surface. Final warning. 2 weeks later, the Senate subcommittee reconvened. This time, the hearing wasn't just public. It was historic. Claire and I sat under blinding lights again. Binders and USB drives stacked in front of us. The room buzzed with cameras. Journalists and angry homeowners flown in from across the country. I laid it all out. The offshore accounts. The shell corporations. The campaign donations. Claire presented the documents the Whisperer had leaked. A senator from Texas leaned forward. So you're telling us the money collected from homeowners in neighborhoods like Willow Creek was funneled overseas, laundered and used to influence American politics? Yes, Claire said firmly. And we can prove it. The room erupted. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The headlines exploded within hours of the Senate hearing. HOA scandal goes global. Offshore accounts linked to U.S. neighborhood associations. Are homeowners funding corruption? TV anchors called it the biggest housing scandal in decades. Talk shows debated whether HOAs should even exist. And ordinary people, millions of them, finally saw what had been happening behind the curtain. But exposure came with a price. My phone lit up with threats. One voicemail hissed, "We know where you live. Your garage door won't protect you this time." Another said, "Drop the act, hero. Nobody saves you when the lights go out." And it wasn't just me. Rita called in a panic because someone had scrawled "liar" across her driveway in red paint. Miss Diaz found a dead fish on her porch. Claire's email account was hacked, and fake confessions were circulated online, claiming she had fabricated evidence for fame. The machine was lashing out. In the chaos, another envelope arrived. Unlike before, this one had a return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. "I can't stay in the shadows anymore. Meet me tomorrow. You need to hear everything." The signature, Janet Cole, former Stratford accountant. It was her all along. The whisperer. When we met, she looked exhausted, eyes sunken, her hands trembling as she stirred a coffee cup. "I was the one moving the money," she admitted. "I created the invoices, set up the accounts, moved funds offshore. At first I told myself it was just bookkeeping. But when I saw the numbers, millions disappearing, I knew what it really was. It funded foreign projects, construction overseas, election interference. If you think Harold was scary, you haven't seen the real players." Her words chilled me. Harold had been a neighborhood tyrant. Stratford had been a corporate parasite. But this was geopolitical.
A week later, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside my house. Federal agents stepped out, badges flashing. "Mr. Miller," one said, "we need you to come with us." At their field office, I sat under buzzing fluorescent lights as they questioned me for hours. Where had I gotten the files? Who was the whisperer? Did I understand the danger? Finally, one agent leaned forward. "We're moving on this, but you need to understand, this isn't just about homeowners. This ties into national security. Foreign money has been flowing into American politics through these accounts for years." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos. Luxury villas in the Caribbean. Skyscrapers in Dubai. Private jets, all purchased with laundered HOA money. "This is what you stumbled into," he said. "Are you ready to testify again? This time in federal court?" My mouth was dry, but I nodded. Yes. The retaliation turned vicious. My tires were slashed again, but this time it wasn't just rubber. They left a knife stuck into the hood of my car. Claire's office was broken into, her hard drive stolen. Rita's dog went missing for 2 days before turning up at the edge of the neighborhood, shaken and filthy. Fear spread like wildfire. Some neighbors begged me to stop. "You've done enough," one man pleaded. "Don't drag us deeper," but others stood firmer than ever. Miss Diaz, fragile as she was, said, "If we let them win, they'll never stop. You keep going, we'll stand behind you." Federal court was nothing like the local hearings. It was colder, harsher, higher stakes. Lawyers for Horizon Group and their partners filled the room in sharp suits, armed with binders of their own. They argued that the documents were fake, the witnesses unreliable, the accusations politically motivated. But then Janet, the whisperer, took the stand. Her testimony was devastating. She explained how Stratford had created fake vendors, how invoices were inflated, how money flowed into offshore accounts. She described being pressured by executives, threatened with termination, even followed by strangers. Finally, she broke down in tears. "I thought it was just numbers on a screen. But those numbers ruined families. They stole homes. They destroyed lives." The courtroom was silent. One by one, the defense's arguments collapsed. The prosecution showed bank transfers, emails, signed contracts. They showed Judge Callahan's financial records, consulting fees, that lined up perfectly with case dismissals. When the jury saw a chart connecting HOA fines from Willow Creek to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, then directly into a U.S. senator's campaign fund, the air seemed to crackle. This wasn't just fraud anymore. It was treasonous. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came down. Executives from Stratford, leaders of Horizon Group, even Judge Callahan, they were sentenced to decades in prison. Federal investigations spread like wildfire to other states, other HOAs, other developers. The machine was collapsing. But it wasn't joy I felt when the gavel fell. It was exhaustion. Relief mixed with the weight of everything we had endured. Back in Willow Creek, life slowly returned to normal. The new board held open meetings where neighbors voted on every decision. Fines were rare, modest, fair. The basketball hoops returned. Miss Diaz's tomatoes grew without fear. Rita laughed again. At the first summer block party in years, someone raised a toast. To John, the man who fought back. I shook my head. To all of us, I said, because I never could have done it alone. The crowd cheered. For once it felt like a real community. The trials sent shockwaves through Washington. Senators who had once smiled politely during hearings now scrambled to distance themselves from Horizon Group and Stratford. PACs were audited, campaign funds traced, donors exposed. News anchors didn't mince words. HOA cartel topples political giants, billions in laundered funds traced to US elections. One evening, Claire called me, her voice electric. They're drafting legislation already. Federal oversight of HOAs, transparency requirements, limits on fines. This is bigger than housing now. It's about democracy. I wanted to feel triumphant, but all I felt was hollow. Every headline reminded me of the months of fear, the threats, the neighbors who had nearly lost everything. The machine was bleeding, yes, but scars don't vanish overnight. Janet, the whisperer, didn't return to her old life. She entered witness protection, her identity scrubbed, her future uncertain. Before she disappeared, she left me one final note. I spent years moving numbers on a screen. You made me see the people behind them. Don't let anyone forget. Her words stayed with me. Because if the world forgot, it would all happen again. Months later, as I was leaving my driveway, a man stepped into the street. My heart froze. It was Lionel. He looked thinner, older, his windbreaker hanging loose. Fresh out of prison, on a reduced sentence for cooperating. Don't worry, he said quickly, hands raised. I'm not here to threaten you. Then why are you here? He looked down at the pavement. Because I wanted to say, I was wrong. I thought I was protecting the community. I told myself the fines kept order. But I knew Harold was dirty. I went along because it was easier. I didn't respond. He swallowed. You did what I never had the guts to do. You fought back. For that, I respect you. Then he walked away, leaving me with a bitter taste. Respect meant little now, but it was a reminder that even villains were human, and humans could break under pressure. Claire wasn't done digging. With international journalists, she uncovered connections that stretched far beyond American borders. HOA money had financed projects in Eastern Europe, luxury resorts in the Caribbean, and construction in the Middle East. Some of the funds even traced back to companies flagged for ties to foreign intelligence services. This wasn't just about greed, Claire said during one late-night call. It was about influence. They used our neighborhoods as laundromats for global power. I thought of Rita's $150 grass fine, Miss Diaz's $200 for tomatoes, my own $250 for parking in my driveway. Petty, ordinary numbers. And yet multiplied across thousands of neighborhoods, they became billions, fuel for corruption stretching across oceans. The thought left me nauseous. The Senate introduced sweeping reforms, mandatory transparency, every HOA required to publish full financials online, caps on fines, no more than $50 per violation, lien restrictions, no home could be foreclosed on for less than $5,000 in unpaid dues, independent audits, every management company subject to yearly federal review. Some states went further, abolishing mandatory HOAs entirely. Developers fumed, lobbyists scrambled, but the tide had turned. When the president signed the Homeowner Protection Act, cameras flashed as she declared, no American should fear losing their home over the height of their grass or the color of their fence. Today we return power to the people. Watching on TV, I felt a swell of pride, not for myself, but for every neighbor who had whispered, nodded, signed petitions, and stood up when it mattered. But victory had costs. Claire received death threats for months. Janet vanished into anonymity. Some whistleblowers lost jobs, branded troublemakers, and me, I carried scars that didn't fade. I jumped at shadows. I double-checked locks 3 times a night. Some neighbors still avoided me, wary of being dragged into battles again. One evening, Rita asked me softly, do you ever regret it? Fighting back. I thought of the nights of terror, the smear campaigns, the close calls. Then I thought of Harold in handcuffs, Stratford dismantled, laws rewritten, families saved. No, I said, not once. Life in Willow Creek transformed. The new board was small, humble and transparent. Meetings were held on front lawns with kids running around, neighbors voting by show of hands. The basketball court was repaved, the pool chairs replaced, the broken lights fixed. All done openly, with receipts taped to bulletin boards, so everyone knew exactly where the money went. At the next block party, Miss Diaz served salsa made from her tomatoes, free of fear. The Lindsay's hoop echoed with the sound of basketballs. Rita's laugh carried across the cul-de-sac. For the first time, Willow Creek felt like home, not a battlefield. Even after the reforms, the shadow of the HOA cartel lingered. Investigations stretched on for years. Horizon executives cut plea deals. Politicians scrambled to explain donations they'd conveniently forgotten to disclose. News programs ran specials titled, The HOA Empire, How Your Neighborhood Was Robbed. Documentaries aired on streaming platforms, dramatizing my testimony, Claire's reporting, and Janet's files. Actors played Harold, Lionel, even me. Watching it was surreal, like seeing my life turned into entertainment.
But behind the spotlight, real families were still struggling. Some who had lost homes to bogus liens never got them back. Others were still paying off debt from bogus legal fees. The scars of the machine ran deeper than any law could heal. The U.S. wasn't the only country shaken. Horizon's overseas ties unraveled. European regulators traced shell companies back to London bankers. Caribbean officials discovered luxury resorts built with dirty HOA cash. One investigation revealed money flowing into political parties in Eastern Europe, destabilizing elections, funding propaganda. What had started with a fine on my Honda Civic driveway had spiraled into a geopolitical scandal. International media hounded me for interviews. How does it feel to have uncovered the biggest homeowner fraud in history? One reporter asked. I never had a good answer, because it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Claire's reporting won awards, Pulitzers, Emmys, national honors. But it came with a price. She was constantly harassed online, her family dragged into smear campaigns. Once, while walking to her car, she found her tires slashed, and a note on her windshield. Ink won't save you, she told me once, over coffee. I thought I'd feel proud. Instead, I just feel tired. I nodded, because I knew exactly what she meant. Truth had a weight, and carrying it left you bent. A year after the final trial, I got a letter from prison. The sender, Harold, against my better judgment. I read it. His handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. John, I know you think you won. Maybe you did, but you don't understand. This machine is bigger than me, bigger than Stratford, bigger than Horizon. Cut off one head, 2 more grow back. You may have burned us down, but the fire still burns elsewhere. Harold. I folded the letter and locked it away in a drawer. I never wrote back, but his words haunted me, because deep down, I knew they were true. Still, life in Willow Creek was unrecognizable compared to those early years of fear. Kids chalked sidewalks, gardens bloomed, neighbors shared meals without whispering about fines. At the first open election, Rita was voted president of the new board. She laughed when I congratulated her. Don't worry, she said. No fake signatures this time. Even Lionel, after serving his sentence, returned quietly. He kept to himself, mowing his lawn, waving at kids. The community didn't forgive him, but they tolerated him. It was progress. Sometimes I walked the same streets I once patrolled in paranoia. I remembered the binder, the post-it notes, the fear in Miss Diaz's eyes, the slashed tires, the men in suits who warned me to stop. I thought of the Senate hearings, the flashing cameras, the whisperer's trembling hands as she confessed. I thought of Claire's voice, steady even when hers was the only one calling for truth. And I thought of the letter slipped under my door, all those years ago, $250 for unauthorized vehicle storage. The spark that lit everything. One letter, one fight, one community, and then a nation. One summer evening, Willow Creek held a neighborhood picnic. Children splashed in the pool, burgers sizzled on grills, music played from portable speakers. Rita raised her glass. To community, she said. Everyone echoed it. Glasses raised, laughter filling the air. I stood back, watching. Not as a fighter, not as a witness, but as a neighbor. For the first time in years, I felt at peace, because the machine had been exposed. The darkness dragged into light. And though Harold might be right, that other heads would grow back. At least here, in this cul-de-sac lined with green mailboxes, the monster was gone. Months after the reforms passed, I received an invitation from a university in Washington, D.C. They were holding a symposium on grassroots activism in the modern age, and they wanted me to speak. I laughed when I read it. Me, a man who once just wanted to park his car in peace, now standing in front of scholars and policymakers. But when I arrived, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about the movement. Survivors from across the country sat in the audience. A woman from Florida, who had nearly lost her home over a mailbox color. A veteran from Arizona, who'd been fined for a flag. A young couple from Nevada, who had their house seized over unapproved landscaping. When I told Willow Creek's story, I didn't dramatize it. I didn't exaggerate. I just told the truth. And when I finished, the applause wasn't for me. It was for everyone who had ever fought back. After the symposium, Claire and I walked the Capitol Mall. The monuments glowed under the night sky, silent witnesses to centuries of battles fought in very different ways. She sighed. I'm stepping back after this. I've done my part. Let the next reporter carry the torch. You deserve a rest, I said. She smiled faintly. So do you. But somehow I don't think you'll take one. She was right. Because even though Willow Creek was safe, the machine still lurked in other forms, in other places. My fight might be over, but others would come after me. 1 year later, I visited Harold in prison. Not out of pity, out of curiosity. He looked older, his hair grayer, but his eyes still carried that smug spark. You came, he said, to gloat? No, I replied. To understand. He chuckled. Understand what? That I was just a cog? That the money was always going to flow, with or without me. You stopped me, fine. But you didn't stop them. I leaned closer. Maybe not everywhere, but I stopped them here. And sometimes that's enough. For the first time his smile faltered. I left without another word. Time softened the edges. Children grew up. New families moved in. Fences were repainted. Roofs replaced. The fear that once gripped us became just a story neighbors told newcomers. Did you know this place was once the center of a national scandal? Most didn't believe it at first. How could quiet streets and tidy lawns hide something so dark? But the old ones remembered. Rita, now with streaks of gray in her hair, still led the board. Miss Diaz still sold tomatoes at the market. The Lindsay's kids had gone off to college, but their basketball hoop still stood tall. And me, I finally stopped keeping binders on the dining room table. Still, the cost followed me. Some nights I woke sweating. Sure, I heard footsteps outside my window. Sometimes I caught myself scanning parking lots for black SUVs. The scars weren't visible, but they were real. Yet those scars reminded me of something important. Silence feeds corruption. Fear protects the corrupt. And truth, though it costs dearly, is the only weapon that breaks them.
One evening, years later, I stood at the end of my driveway. The air was quiet, the streetlights glowing, kids riding bikes in lazy circles. I thought back to the first violation letter, a plain white envelope with a fake signature, accusing me of parking in my own driveway. The board thought it was just another easy fine, another resident who would pay quietly. Instead, it became the spark that lit a war that exposed corruption in boardrooms, in courthouses, in political offices. A war that dragged shadows into light. A war that started with fear and ended with freedom. The HOA cartel had been dismantled, but Harold was right about one thing: corruption never dies. It shifts, it adapts, it hides in new places. But every machine, no matter how big, has a weakness. And sometimes all it takes to bring it crashing down is one person asking a simple question: why? As I turned back toward my house, the night still and peaceful, I whispered the only words that seemed to fit: this is where it ends.